In this rodeo, Indians are the cowboys, where two cultures meet, next on Wyoming Chronicle. Hello, I'm Richard Ager. Welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. I'm going to begin this program with a personal observation. As a relative newcomer to Wyoming, I've encountered a number of things I didn't expect, and one of them was Indian rodeo. Its existence challenged my outsider presumptions, and so that led us to decide to look at where native culture meets mainstream culture, and how the reality of both can surprise us all. We're going to start with the story of 17-year-old Drew Antone, an up-and-coming rodeo star contending for a shot at the Las Vegas Indian National Championship in bull riding and steer wrestling.
Our first cowboy to go. Representing the great Navajo Nation, Waylon Paul of Shiprock, New Mexico.
Rodeo is in the blood. For newcomers to Wyoming, this may seem strange. Native Americans dressed in cowboy regalia competing against each other, lit up by the dying rays of a setting sun. But this is no act. Rodeo is in their blood. Rodeo is in Indian country's blood.
Well, native people are kind of a natural horsemen. All our young Indian kids need something that they can shoot for a world title, and you can start them from knee-high up to high school and everything like that. So it's really something that any person can fall back at and use it as a stepping stone for the future to make good things happen in their lives.
Seconds feel like minutes. After that shoe opens, it's just you and a 1,000-pound animal.
From the beginning, it's really fuzzy. It's a lot of blur. But as the more you ride, things start to get clearer. And it's almost like slow motion.
Rodeo is in Arnold Antone's blood. Growing up in New Mexico, he spent his summers traveling the country competing in Indian rodeos. Now, his children carry on that tradition. His 17-year-old son, Drew, is a champion bull rider.
Came out and he was spinning to the left. Almost got bucked off around there that first round, and then I kind of just dropped my free arm around. So I was trying to wait, but I didn't wait long enough, and kind of was trying to scoot out the back end. Then I got flung, landed on my back, came up behind me and got me with the horn, flying through the air.
The stakes are high. Drew, Arnold, and 125 others are all competing in steer wrestling, team roping, and bull riding. The prize? The winner moves on to the Indian Rodeo National Finals in Las Vegas.
We call this the Rocky Mountain Region Finals. When that dust settled down after this rodeo this weekend, right here at Riverton, Wyoming, the champion cowboy from each event, year-end champion, will get to go to the Indian National Finals rodeo.
To be good, it takes dedication.
Like I tell my kids that if they want to pursue rodeo, they have to eat, drink, and sleep rodeo. I mean, it's almost a 24-hour thing, 7 days a week thing. You have to live it. It has to come from the heart.
Then it becomes an addiction.
Blackie wants to go. I would say it's a family thing. You grow up with rodeo. This is just a way of life. You crave it. You just kind of, I suppose some people want to play basketball. When you're into rodeo, you want a rodeo.
Here at the rodeo, two cultures intertwine that were traditionally portrayed as enemies of the Old West. Indian cowboys make sense. After all, natives have such strong ties to the horse.
Well, of course, the cowboys and Indians, that's long gone. The cowboy think Indians have always been cowboys. They've always rode horses, broke horses, rode bareback, you know. That's how there were games, that's how they, horseback games. You know, there's gay rodeos and there's black rodeos, and so there's Native American rodeos. So I don't know, maybe just everybody's into rodeo, I think, more than we probably recognize. I think it's just kind of a tradition that's been around for a long time. It's just now put in the arena perspective.
A senior at Wind River High School, rodeo is important to Drew. Colleges offer rodeo scholarships. In recent years, he has gained a local following and has been noticed in the local press.
It's pretty cool, you know. Sometimes I think that the Native community is even more supportive than the white community. It's because they like to see people like me or even any Native kid do good in anything, you know. It's always good to have the Native community behind you, help you out, even when nobody else believes in you.
After a stellar first bull ride, Drew's chances at Vegas are looking good.
Ride like the way you were riding.
Arnold places in the team roping competition.
I guess I'm going to the NFL.
So at least one member of the Antone family
You can do it too, son.
will be making the trip to Nevada. Now it's Drew's turn. After 4 exhausting rides, Drew doesn't qualify.
I think the appeal is the competitiveness. It's an adrenaline rush, the love of horses. I think just kind of with rodeo, it's in your blood type of thing.
And joining me in the studio are Helsha Acuna, Professor of American Indian Studies at Central Wyoming College. Caskey Russell, Professor of English and American Indian Studies program at the University of Wyoming. And Jordan Dresser, journalist and, of course, our correspondent on this story. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
You know, I should say as we begin that some of what we're going to discuss touches on cultural beliefs, customs, and inevitably stereotypes. And to get past them towards greater understanding, we may make a few uncomfortable references along the way. I hope it's worth it. Helsha, I wanted to start with you. Yes. What do you think is the state of mutual understanding or misunderstanding between white people and Native Americans?
Depends on the region you live in.
Well, that's
to a large degree. Yes. I'm from New Mexico, and when I first came out to Wyoming, it's been almost 16 winters now, it was shocking for me, because I met up with a kind of prejudice that was very face-to-face, in-your-face kind of prejudice. And I felt like I wanted to go home at that point, but I didn't, because my grandpa told me not to. He said, you need to stay there and know what it's like. Since then, I think things have really gotten a lot better over the 15 years I've been here. I think there's been lots of community work and tribal work and educational work towards making that understanding a bit better.
Well, Caskey, of course, you know, you're originally from Alaska with roots there. You're now here. What would you say in answer to that question?
Yeah, I'm originally from the Seattle area. My mom's family is from Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
In answer to that question, I think a lot of it comes from just being unaware of American Indian history, American Indian culture, and not knowing a lot about American Indians in general. We don't have a wonderful education program in the primary or secondary levels about American Indian culture. In my area in Seattle, there's not a lot known about the history of treaties, Indian removals and stuff. So I think it's basis. So
in other words, you think Indian history has not been sort of part of mainstream history, as it were?
Yeah, I would see it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jordan, I know that you've been running a number of different stories over the years, originally from the Wind River Reservation yourself. What would you say is the state of being right now?
I would say, especially since, you know, my generation, the younger one, sometimes you kind of don't see a lot of the prejudice and different things that a lot of the older generations had to go through. I did work with the Wynnever Hotel in their Northern Rappel experience, and we went through all these really old photos from like the 1920s and 30s and 40s, and we found this, I found this black and white one of an outhouse, and one said Indians and one said whites. And I always felt like that was really important to put in there, just because I felt like there was times where people forgot that that was only, you know, not too long ago, where things were segregated like that. And in terms of Indians, especially in these border towns, you know, a lot of times they didn't want to do business with them. But things changed once oil came into play. Then all of a sudden, you know, the natives had money to spend. So of course, the towns opened up their doors. But back then it was so strict. And I think that's a really good thing to look at, because it reminds you that these things happened to us a long time ago that sometimes now are so, not so in your face, but they're more stifled and behind the scenes.
Well, you know, I mean, you talk about segregation, and certainly when you mention those kind of images, the word apartheid comes to my mind. But when people look at, well, where do Native Americans live? Native Americans are the only ones that have reservations. And, you know, many of those reservations, as we all know, have a lot of social problems, high unemployment. Why do Indians stay on the reservations when there are so many problems? What is there to mitigate that?
It's home.
It's home.
It's home. At least it's the home that we're familiar with. And Indian people are very land-based, historically have been very land-based. Land is not just something that one walks on. It's not just something that one can purchase and sell or build on. It is a sacred entity. Place is very important to Indian people. And I think that considering the history of most American Indians in this country, that what little they have left, which is the reservations that still exist, is a very important part of identity. Very important part.
Well, you know, we're taping this program Thanksgiving week,
Yes.
as it happens, when much of the nation thinks of Pilgrims and the Indians that they celebrated their first Thanksgiving with. But now here we are in 2012. Do you think that most Native Americans consider Thanksgiving a day of celebration or of regret? Mourning.
Right, yeah.
Boy, that's a big generalization.
Yeah. I went to an anti-Thanksgiving party this last weekend, hosted by a good friend of mine. She's Native. In my own family, it was a time to gather together and have a wonderful meal.
Yes.
Oddly enough, in the 70s when I was a kid, the Redskins and Indians was the Redskins versus Cowboys was a football game that was played quite a bit.
Yes.
I don't see that anymore. But you know, I think it, like Elsha said, it's really a huge question. Depends on the family. You know.
Sure does.
Yeah. I don't know if there's one easy answer for that.
You told us, Jordan, as you came in, you spent part of the day cooking a great number of turkeys. So I'm wondering what your answer might be.
I think, well, you know, my family, I grew up with Thanksgiving and all the holidays, Easter, you know, Christmas, all these Christian holidays, you know, because I was raised with that. And then it's just a holiday we celebrate too. But also, you know, once I got older and went to college, you know, and attended classes, and especially in American Indian Studies, that's when I could kind of learn a little bit more about how, you know, it's a day to also think about what all we've had to sacrifice and go through in order for us to all be here, in a sense. So I'm grateful for that. Well, that's what I always think about.
And I think that most of the families that I know that are Indian feel that way. It's you know, there's always room for Thanksgiving.
Though, because, you know, Thanksgiving, of course, was the marking of the arrival of the white man in America and all that followed.
Symbolically, it was, yes.
Well, yes.
Yes, it was. And lots of nations and tribes have disappeared, have lost an awful lot over the past 500 years. But I think that by nature, Native American people like to and need to give that Thanksgiving about lots of things. We are still here. We still have families, we have reservations, we have a growing population.
Well, and also, you know, what possibly comes to mind is that it could be another example of that cross-cultural assimilation. I mean, you know, your piece about Indian rodeo is a good example where they've made it, Native Americans have made it their own sport.
Well, I think it's just that idea that, you know, I always consider Native Americans the ultimate survival story, just because they went through everything that they did, and then they're still here in the end. And I think along the way, you know, they picked up a lot of different things from what they would consider mainstream culture and made it their own, and also used it to promote their culture and to pass that on for future generations and different things. Like, you know, like the powwows. You know, powwows was originally started off as a way to continue the songs and dances and things like that a lot of times were being banned. So they used that for to carry that on. So I think that's just that idea of taking something and just using it.
You know, Kasky, you had mentioned the Cowboys and the Redskins. Some years back I was reporting a story on the Akwesasne Reservation, and a particular Mohawk gentleman had a Washington Redskins cap on. And I inquired, why would you wear that? And he said, because I can.
Okay, that's an interesting answer. I like what Jordan was saying about the kind of, you know, blending of cultures. The cultural blending has happened ever since Europeans arrived here, in some wonderful and very helpful ways for natives. Up in my area in Seattle and Washington, of course, the adopted technologies, fishing technologies, and other elements of European culture, and blended it with native culture, no problem. Problems came when it was forced, whether it's religion or banning the language or boarding schools, you know, education. Anytime it's forced against, native culture will take what is helpful for its, you know, its survival and its own business. But when it's forced into something, that's when it becomes destructive.
Well, you know, speaking of culture, of course, you also taught film courses and the image of the Native American. And, you know, anyone old enough to remember the old John Wayne movies knew that the Indians were always the enemies at that point. Yeah. But that's changed considerably. Where are we at now?
Where we are, still not a lot of mainstream Hollywood, huge studio films about natives. A lot of the wonderful work is done on the kind of independent level. Some wonderful American Indian documentary makers, filmmakers, writers, artists, you know, are doing work often unnoticed, often kind of flying under the mainstream radar. Hollywood is still kind of interested in seeing natives in the late 19th century, and that keeps them stagnating, at least I would think, to a larger audience. The image of the Indian stagnates a little bit. But below that level, in the terms of independent artists, it's flourishing, wonderful culture flourishing in the arts and literature and film.
You know, when we look at, there was one major Hollywood movie made back in 1992, The Last of the Mohicans, that starred the late Russell Means, who just passed away. What I found interesting about his connection was that he began a film career after a real-life career, played a major role in the American Indian movement, particularly the standoff at Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation. That was a signal event, it seemed. Well, what effect do you think that's had on Native Americans, on how they look at things since then?
Wounded Knee?
Yeah.
The second one?
The second one.
1973, yes. I think that it lives within us. I know that when I teach history and I teach Native American studies, that I try to cover that part of more modern history of American Indians. I think that it brought into the media, for the first time for a lot of people, aside from the Fishins up in Washington, it brought us into their homes. That we were on their TVs.
On the nightly news, yes.
People would begin to questioning is such a good thing. Because when you start to question, then you start to formulate thoughts and ideas and maybe get answers.
I should say also, it was an armed standoff with the FBI.
It was an armed standoff, yes.
Drew the attention.
Yes, and the people who were involved in that, the Indian people, did surrender. They surrendered based on the word of the government, that the government would begin to take another look at the treaties that had been broken and would renegotiate, which never happened, unfortunately. But I think, back to your original discussion of acculturation, I wanted to use the word acculturation. When two or more cultures come together in some way, we talked about forced assimilation, which is a very, very different creature. But acculturation is a natural product of cultural interaction. It is something that Indians did with Indians. Not all Indians are alike, and we have a lot of cultural borrowing that went on. And I think that, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that to assimilate actually successfully, you have to have the permission of a culture you want to assimilate into. But acculturation is a blending. I'll take a little bit of this from you, and you can take this, and we'll make a better life for us, for our communities, our families.
Well, we're, as usual, running a little low on time, but I wanted to get to something which I think is a bit of an elephant in the room often when you discuss things like this, and that is the stereotypes that often get in the way of understanding. One that really comes to mind is how Native Americans view time and work schedules. And I'm just going to lay that open and say, how do you explain that difference?
It's a different worldview. Time is not a straight line, it's not linear. It's more ongoing, a cycle.
Well, you know, the stereotypical situation is, you know, the white person makes an appointment.
And the Indian is late.
Or not yeah.
Yeah, and that's a cultural, a lot of times that is merely significantly culturally. Most people of my generation and my parents' generation were not raised with a watch. You did things as you needed to. You took care of what needed to be taken care of. First this, then this, then this.
Is that one reason why the two sort of cultures remain side by side but separate? Because sort of, is time different on the reservation?
I think there's been so much assimilation now and acculturation between the border towns, as we say, and the reservation that I think most of us have to function on linear time. Well,
you know, I have to ask Jordan, you've done some consultancy work at what is now the biggest business, of course, in Fremont County, the hotel and casino, the Wind River. Lot of demanding jobs there. I'm sure, you know, have the people on the reservation been able to take advantage of that employment opportunity and show up on time and do all those sort of scheduled things?
Yeah, and they thrive at it. You know, every month they have the Soaring Eagle Award, which is awarded to employees who show up on time, don't have no call-ins, no nothing. And pretty much like they get a pretty good chunk of them. You know, there's at least 700 employees there, and I think at least half of them achieve that every month. You know, so I think that, yeah, they do. You know, they're there every time, every day, because, you know, I think we all learn slowly but surely through the casino that time is money, and you have to be there chasing that dollar, or else who else will?
No, so I mean, is there any perception that, well, now you're living by the white man's rules, or is it more like that acculturation that you're talking about, where they just adopt what works?
Well, I think we have a dominant culture, which is the white man's world, as you put it. Native Americans were forced to be assimilated into that culture. But I also believe that just the contact allows for certain, if history had allowed us as cultures to proceed in a normal way without oppression and genocide and colonization, I think it would be a much different world, and a lot of those stereotypes that go back and forth. It's not just white people having stereotypes of Indians, would not have...
Well, we have just over a minute and a half to go, and I'll pose this to you, because we saw in the recent election, I think, a declining dominance of the white population, in which overwhelmingly the majority of white voters voted for the candidate who did not win. Can you see a day when that multicultural growth in the entire nation would make reservations unnecessary?
Boy, that's a huge question.
You've got a minute.
And we have a minute. Reservations, here's what I'll say about reservations really quick. They were originally set aside to remove Indians out of the way, right? The remnants of these tribes that the government dominated. It was kind of prisons. But now they become the center of cultural life, and it's often the center of language revitalizations, the sovereignty movement for natives. So we need the reservations for that purpose. The larger question I really can't answer. I don't know.
It's a very far in the future sort of proposal.
Well, it is, but I'm an optimist. And
Well, I just think the big thing to educate people too is that, just because you grew up on the reservation doesn't mean that you can't achieve great things,
Exactly.
And that'll be the last word for now. And I want to thank Helsha Acuna, Caskey Russell, and Jordan Dresser. And we're going to leave you with another glimpse of Indian rodeo. Be sure to check our website for more content. Thank you very much.